It's Thursday, July 20th. I'm Matt Harmon. Oh, man, what a show. What a show today. I mean, not only are we talking about pass catchers on today's show, that's exciting. Obviously, my favorite, one of those positions within pass catchers is my favorite to talk about. The other one is interesting as well. So I'm excited to talk about that. We also have maybe potentially nebulous position man himself, Kyle Pitts, coming on the show later of the Atlanta Falcons. Very excited for that conversation. But best of all, there's no one that I could. I mean, honestly, actually, I'm kind of dreading having this conversation with Andy Behrens, the co-host for today, because I'm not going to allow any nonsense about merging these positions together to come from him during this podcast. But it is going to be difficult because I had to change this from like the wide receiver preview to pass catcher preview to fit the Kyle Pitts interview. These are the things that I juggle and struggle with, Andy Behrens. But I'm just setting this up now. You are not allowed to do any position merging nonsense on this particular show.
Man, I have a lot of respect for you for heading that off because I was definitely going there. But it's fair. It's fine. I also thought that Kyle Pitts himself was going to be like a really interesting subject for this conversation. But since you're actually going to talk it through with Kyle Pitts, I'm not going to mention him in my big camp questions regarding pass catchers. But that's really exciting that he's here, that he's joining us.
Yeah, it's absolutely great. It's going to be a great conversation. I think, we'll see. We'll see what we can get out of him in terms of positions and things like that in that offense. Man, I mean, you know me, I'm a diehard Arthur Smith bro. So I'm hoping that Kyle Pitts is also an Arthur Smith bro, and we'll really dive into it later on in the show. That's coming up, of course, but we do have a lot of other things to get to, Andy.
I just drafted Desmond Ridder as a third quarterback in Fishbowl, so I would love to hear some Desmond Ridder hype.
I think he's actually my fourth quarterback in Fishbowl because I also drafted, I think, Sam Howell and Brock Purdy, maybe.
Oh, yeah. I collected. In fact, I bragged about it to Dalton as soon as I took Purdy. So I actually assembled the Kittle, Purdy, Moody stack, which I'm pretty excited about.
It's kind of funny, too, just because, like, you think like Desmond Ridder goes so. Excuse me, I misspoke. I have Brock Purdy. I have Kenny Pickett, not Sam Howell. I'm not actually sure if that's better, but it is what it is. It's better. I'm not being disrespectful. It is better. But yeah, Desmond Ridder, even in a draft like that where you can start multiple quarterbacks, that dude goes so absurdly late. In best ball drafts, he goes so late. And it's like, yo, this guy's all respect given to, the pride of ODU, Taylor Heineke, ODU's finest there. Ridder's probably going to start all year. And like he can run a little bit, he can do. Like it is crazy. He just goes so late. But obviously, yeah, he's not a pass catcher. But we're talking about Desmond Ridder now, and it is very interesting.
Yeah, I believe he's the last of the surefire starting quarterbacks who went in my draft. I mean, Heineke himself talks about like when he talks about his role, it's as a backup. So I think that's settled. I don't think that's an open camp question.
No, yeah, Taylor's just there to vibe. Back in his home state of Georgia, he's just there to vibe. All right. Before we get into the pass catcher questions, we do have some breaking news from yesterday, Andy, to talk about a huge name pass catcher himself. The Denzel Mims bros, the truthers, the Denzel Mims truthers are finally free because Denzel Mims was gonna be the Jets did the old hey, we're gonna we're gonna go ahead and release this guy. Wink, wink. Please, somebody give us something. They get like a conditional 6th. They send Denzel Mims and a conditional 7th to the Detroit Lions. Andy, I didn't mean to start like a kerfuffle on Twitter and in my Discord yesterday talking about this because I am not like, I think Denzel Mims showed some interesting stuff as a rookie. I'm not a Denzel Mims truther, but my point was when I talked about this, and there are still some real Denzel Mims bros, especially in my Discord. That was shocking to see. But the only thing that got me interested in this is that I have been saying on this podcast for a long time now, the Detroit Lions have no vertical like X receiver dimension on their roster. And theoretically, that is the role that Denzel Mims should play. What's like scale of 0 to 10? Should we care about this at all?
Yeah, he rockets all the way from wide receiver 125 on my board to wide receiver 118. It's a huge jump. Yeah, no, it's hard for me to it's hard for me to get terribly excited about this. And I feel like back in the day, I was pretty interested in Denzel Mims when he came into the league. This is probably a war that you fight all the time, right? Because you are as thorough as anyone has ever been in the fantasy space in terms of like watching receiver film. And then there's this other group of analysts, and they have their own hits over the years, but there's another group of analysts who are just entirely about what are the athletic traits, right? And somewhere in the middle is the rest of us, but you're sort of at an extreme end of actually watching these players. And then there's another group that's just like, what is the SPARQ score? What is their athletic percentile? And this is where Denzel Mims shines, right? Like 6'3", 6'4", 4.3 something speed, pretty close to a 40-inch vertical, incredible 3-cone when he came into the league, right? Like he checked every box. And there's just, we've seen plenty of receivers over the years who check all of the athletic boxes and just can't put it together on the field,
right.
And just can't earn themselves playing time. Obviously, it's a good thing that Mims finds another team because it was not happening with his former team. So we'll see. But he clearly didn't earn playing time for a franchise that at various points during his Jets career really needed somebody to step up. So I'm just not terribly bullish on him right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, Denzel Mims is a rookie. He had 44 targets, 23 catches, 357 yards, no touchdowns. He hasn't scored a touchdown in his career yet. But I do think, like, when you talk about reception perception, he didn't show anything special in that rookie year. 52nd to 59th percentile success rate versus man and press, 21st percentile against zone, nothing interesting there. But he was that prototypical vertical X receiver. And I think he showed that he can play in the league in that role. And then I talked to somebody, that would know about like, hey, why is he not, just because I was mildly curious, like, why is he not playing with the 2021 Jets? And they told me that he wasn't playing because they weren't comfortable with him at all positions. And this person responded with, and this was the, first iteration of the, Robert Saleh, Mike LaFleur, Jets there. And now, not the group that drafted him, by the way. He was drafted to be in the Adam Gase offense, your guy Adam Gase there. But basically they told me, like, that he's not playing because he's not comfortable at all positions. And then this person responded with, yeah, but dude, you can't score. Like, you don't score any points. What are you doing, like, limiting a receiver because he can't learn all positions? And that's the only thing I find interesting is that whether Mims ever does anything. And by the way, if he does anything, it's number one, like, let's see if he makes the roster. And then number two, like, he might be a 500-yard player or something for this team. I just think that it shows that the Lions are admitting that they have a problem, the problem that I've talked about all offseason, which is that they don't have a solution really at a vertical receiver perspective with Jameson Williams facing a suspension. And they don't really have like a verifiable X receiver other than Marvin Jones. And I don't really think we're excited about the 2023 version of Marvin Jones.
Yeah, no, it's a totally worthy flyer to take. I get it. I don't know that I've ever seen less draft compensation involved in a trade, right? So they're not like there's no expense here. There's no cost to this whatsoever. It's a free look at a super athletic player who, as you say, fills a pretty glaring need, at least for the duration of the suspension for Jameson Williams, and then thereafter, no promises.
Yeah, hopefully it just makes the Lions offense better is all that we care. But again, my first reply to everybody with me getting excited about him yesterday is, let's see if he makes a team. Okay, that's step one here. There's probably, for as much as you might want to criticize the Jets for not playing him, there's probably normally a reason players don't play. Even if it is a silly reason, there's some reason within there. Okay, last other thing to cover here before we get to wide receivers. Hey, Andy, let's just take a second to celebrate that today is the last full day that Daniel Snyder is going to be the owner of the Washington Commanders. The sale is set to become complete today. I mean, just, my best friend, my best man in my wedding was a huge, for whatever reason, Washington fan. We grew up around the area. As I always say, I can't believe I love this sport. Having watched the Washington franchise is the most watched franchise really of my childhood. I texted him today, just like, we're cracking a beer for this one. It's like, hey, man, shout out to you Commanders fans out there. Everything is wide open now. Goodbye, Daniel Snyder.
Yeah, I do have a fair number of Washington fan friends in my life, and I'm legitimately happy for them. I'm happy for the NFL. He's been kind of a especially in recent years, kind of a smothering presence for the NFL. It was one thing when he was just a punchline because Washington was always the team that wanted to win the offseason and made the splashy signings that would go nowhere and were often disastrous. Quite another thing when he's this much of an embarrassment to the league. So it is great to not have to consider Dan Snyder anymore when we consider the NFL. I like that. I like everything about the trajectory of the franchise. Honestly, the ownership change. Love Bieniemy. We've talked about Washington a fair amount on the show. I love that they're gonna kind of kick the tires on a potentially fun quarterback. Love the receiving. I like a lot about the direction of this team.
And it feels easier to get excited about the team now that Snyder is not, because it's just like, we don't talk enough, especially on like a fantasy podcast, that everything starts at the top with ownership and then, trickles down from there. I'm not saying that, now that Dan Snyder is gone, like now Sam Howell will be good magically, right? That's not what I'm saying, but it just, the operation is going to be better. They're going to be smarter. They're probably going to be more efficient. Look, and like, let's talk about the Carolina Panthers. Like they had a big name owner come and take that thing over, and it did not. And by the way, Ron Rivera was involved in that too. Was eventually shown the door by David Tepper. He's, unless they go crazy this year, I don't know that he's long for the Washington head coaching job. It's ironic he's been caught in both those crosshairs. It doesn't always turn into like great stuff, but there's an easier path now than there was with Dan Snyder. I will say though, while we're saying goodbye to Dan Snyder from like an ownership perspective, our colleague Charles Robinson has done a great job talking on his podcast about the potential like clash of the NFL and John Gruden here. And while there's no heroes in that case, and Charles has done a great job pointing that out on the podcast, You Pod to Win the Game, you should definitely go listen to the episode he did with Charles McDonald, kind of talking on this. We might get some, if that thing doesn't go to arbitration, in that case, John Gruden versus the NFL, we might get some even more dirty laundry from Dan Snyder and a lot of other people, because it sounds like from what Charles has said that John wants to burn this thing down. And, John Gruden got what he got, and that is what it is. But man, so we might not have heard the last of Dan Snyder.
Yeah, which, of course, too bad. I'm sure the NFL itself just wants to close this chapter entirely. That's true. But I'm still glad that he's not like, because the other thing about Dan Snyder, just as an executive, as an owner, man, did he insinuate himself and insert himself into decision making where he just like should not have been involved, right? Like his almost every time he came in from the top rope and overruled something, it ended in disaster. So just like in terms of the day-to-day operation of the franchise, the fact that he no longer has a say in it, what an absolutely huge win. Yeah.
Man, the amount of nightmares that franchise has lived through under his watch, pretty unfortunate. All right, let's get down to serious business here, Andy. What we're here to do today. Today, we're going to wrap up our Countdown to Camp miniseries by looking at the wide receiver and tight ends, pass catchers. That's what we're gonna say. Attempting to ask the biggest questions we want answered in August, training camp, preseason, the whole thing that we think is going to have major fantasy implications this season. Essentially, we're providing you with a fantasy football's viewer guide to the preseason. Andy, you are the king of the secret list. So we have both compiled our secret list of the three biggest questions that we have. And we're going to have some honorable mention ones as well, just as we did last time you were on the show. But Andy, unlike usual, I'm not going to be a nice host. I'm not going to give you the reins first. I'm going to ask the first question, and it's because I'm admitting I'm outright cheating with this first question to group a bunch of questions into one. I want to know, Andy, what does the playing time look like for the round one rookie wide receivers? See, I just lumped in 4 questions all in one there because I do think this is the most interesting. Hopefully I didn't kill too many of yours by saying this. It would be rough if you had an Addison, a Johnston, and a Flowers question and you're done now. We can let you go off the podcast. You actually might not hate that. But I'm just very curious, like where all these guys slot in from a week one perspective, or are some of them going to be back half guys? Because we know that rookie wide receivers in the back half of their rookie seasons have been not just like great fantasy bets, but potential league winning bets, each of like really the last 2 years and a little bit before that. So I'm just curious about these guys, Andy. Zay Flowers, Quentin Johnston, Jordan Addison, and obviously Jackson Smith and Jigba as well. What does their early season playing time look like? Because that's going to really go down down in the book says, was it right to draft them or was it right to kind of wait for them to hit on the waiver wire? Which one of the, where do you think all four of those guys slot playing time wise early in the season?
Yeah, first of all, it's super important to remember that if we're talking about really early season playing time, just give it a minute, Yeah. Sometimes those first couple games, it's not indicative of anything, right? I remember there were people who were disappointed with Justin Jefferson seemingly having a minor role for a game or two. When he ultimately finished with just an absolutely spectacular first season and has been nothing but spectacular ever since. So don't sweat September. If you believe in the player right now, believe in them entering October, because as you say, sometimes these guys are the most decisive players in fantasy, right? Amon-Ra St. Brown as a rookie in his final month and a half was just absolute money. It was 12 targets a week. It was great. So I think this is an important question. I guess I would say that with JSN and with Jordan Addison, those guys, I suppose, could fail, but they have pretty tidy paths to playing time. If Addison doesn't end up on the field, that's on him. That's not. Yep. I don't think that's a murky situation. I think he was drafted to run 600 routes for that team and be a relevant player immediately. I guess we could discuss the idea of JSN being a long-term replacement for Tyler Lockett in some way, but I think he fits neatly into what is going to be a really fun passing offense. So I'm less worried with those two. I think there is a greater range of outcome for Flowers and for Johnson. Johnson's got to find his way in a team that already has two really good options, right? And we can debate as to what exactly Josh Palmer is and the tight end position and all that, but they have a couple of target magnets on that team already. So he's in a different situation. And then Flowers, no shock here because we've already talked about the Ravens receiving core a few times on this pod together. I do have a question that kind of plays into that a little bit. That thing, the hierarchy in Baltimore is really interesting to sort through. There's at least a chance that they're going to put the ball in the air 550, 600 times, right? That's been something that OC Todd Monken has done before. If that happens, even if Flowers is the number 4, he can have some games. He can have some moments, certainly, but they've got Odell, they've got Mark Andrews, they've got people who are presumably ahead of him, but he's going to have to play. And he's also tied to a receiving core that has Rashad Bateman and Odell Beckham. So it's not crazy that by November, the healthiest of them by far is Zay Flowers, and he's just forced into a situation where he has to see 8 to 12 targets a week.
Yeah, Flowers and Johnson feel like the guys that could be that second half of the season players. I think there's a very viable scenario where Quentin Johnson is running, 40% of the routes, the first 4 weeks, and he hasn't quite cleared Josh Palmer. And look, my feelings on Josh Palmer are kind of well known. I don't think he's whatever. But I think Quentin Johnson is what that offense needs. In some ways, I think he's what that offense needs. And then in other ways, I think they still kind of need a one true alpha, because I love my guy Keenan Allen, but I think he's sort of transitioning into the, hey, I'm going to just be a pure possession slot receiver. So there is an opening there for Quentin Johnson to be the third receiver right away. But if he captures it right away, I'm not so sure. With Flowers, he could definitely look. Beckham could have a great September and then slow down. You never know. He's a guy that could be a back half of the season. I totally agree with what you said on Addison. If Jordan Addison is not out there running all the routes in week 1, that's a Jordan Addison issue. And that would actually be a little bit concerning. I'm with you. Don't panic the first 3 weeks. And then JSN is definitely the interesting one too, because, look, I just went back and charted Tyler Lockett for reception perception. And like I mentioned, Keenan Allen, DeAndre Hopkins, there's a lot of guys that it's okay, we've started to see the decline in that player, as they're in their 30s. Now with Tyler Lockett, that guy was as good as ever last year. He's incredible. And I think he's a top 10 receiver in the NFL. And I think DK Metcalf is right there with him, and it's just, I think this offense is going to play a lot of 11 personnel. He's going to be on the field right away. Can Geno Smith throw 5,000 yards and 30 plus touchdowns? Can he give us that type of season? Because that's kind of what we're going to need for all these guys to hit. But shoot, man, I love Shane Waldron as a play caller. I think the offensive line is underrated. They got good running backs. They got, great receivers. Geno can definitely do it. It's just like, is JSN going to be a full-time player to start the season? Probably, but I at least am curious about it.
Yeah, it's fun. Like I have to admit, I haven't really thought of Seattle as the kind of team that can just be an absolute fantasy juggernaut, but they're not missing anything, right?
Nope.
Like one running back can go down and they've got another pretty good running back. The receiving core 1 through 3 is unbelievable. Like it's, that is, I don't know, top 5 in the league. It's way up there. We just need Geno to run.
It's like maybe
top 1 in the league.
the Bengals, but then like there's the Bengals. Obviously, I think that Jamar is better than Lockett and Metcalf, but I think Lockett and Metcalf are better than Higgins, and then I think that JSN is probably better than Boyd. I mean, obviously if he's a rookie, but like, yeah, I mean. And then look, there's Washington. They're up there, but they're up there. They might be 2. They might be 1 or 2. Seattle.
Yeah. And all we need is like just basically we just need Geno to run it back at the level. And he played at an incredibly high level last year. It was really thrilling to see. But if he can do that again, now we're talking about a team that is kind of a sneaky threat to average 30 a game.
Yeah, it's very possible. I think. Like if we're talking about teams you need to get right, it is kind of the Seattle Seahawks, I think, are going to be one of those teams. So, all right, Andy, you hit me with your first question since I just cheated and knocked off like 4 situations here.
Okay, I didn't make this my number 1 question because I want to preface it with this. I don't have a lot of doubts about the talent of the player that I'm about to discuss, but it's more about where we're drafting him and what our expectations are given the draft price. And so my question is, can Garrett Wilson justify the optimism? Again, absolutely love the player. Sensational rookie season. I don't have a lot of questions about Garrett Wilson as a route runner, as a separator, as somebody who was absolutely ready to come in and be a star in the NFL. I give him a lot of credit for, 1,100 yards last year, 83 catches, despite an absolutely terrible quarterback situation. I've written it before. Like if you just eliminate the Zach Wilson games and you look at his pace outside of that, it was 100 catches, 1,400 yards. There's simply no question that he's his team's number 1 receiver. And whatever Aaron Rodgers has left is an upgrade over Flacco, over White, over Wilson. The problem for Garrett Wilson is he's like a little bit like the wide receiver version of Justin Fields, which is to say that he was free money last year, but he carries a significant cost in drafts in 2023. He is now too big to fail, right? He's your 2nd round pick. A lot of the time when I see Garrett Wilson go, it's right next to AJ Brown and Devontae Adams, right? It's just ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown. I don't have any doubts about those guys. Like those guys have been like 1,400, 1,500 yard receivers. And so like with most players, we'd say that if you can just have a consolidation season coming off 1,100 yards as a rookie, great. You run that back, do it again. You're an emerging star. But we are drafting Garrett Wilson with the expectation of like a 2nd round receiver in this era needs to give you 100 catches, 1,400 yards, and 10 touchdowns. That's what we're drafting for. And he hadn't done it.
He has not done it. And you're right that you have to like pay the iron price to get Garrett Wilson this year. You mentioned his ADP in early best ball drafts is like 13th overall. Overall. Yeah. It's aggressive. It's ahead of Devontae Adams. It's ahead of Nick Chubb. I'm sure you would take Nick Chubb like without thinking over Garrett Wilson because I know you're really high on Nick Chubb this year. And even like Devontae Adams, bro, I would take Garrett Wilson ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think I've waffled on that, but I think I'm settled on that one. But it's just like, dude, that's Devontae Adams. That's the best. That's the best receiver of this era, potentially. Yeah. He's in that conversation. And I think Garrett Wilson could be a superstar, but I'm with you that it at least leaves you like, oh man, you're right. And by the way, he's another guy that I could easily see us on this podcast. I mean, I'm not wish casting this, but I'm just putting this out there. I can see Andy and I on the like Monday morning recap versions of the podcast, you and I talking about like, it's week 3 and Garrett Wilson has had like 11 targets, 4 catches, 70 yards, like these type of games. He's had a few of those type of games, nothing really explosive yet. But then I could see him finishing with that season that you outlined there, right? It's just like he might be a little bit of a journey to get there because we know Rodgers takes time to figure guys out. And Garrett Wilson is a great player, and he had some incredibly promising, reception perception metrics and just like the eye test in general as a rookie season, like to be a true superstar. But he's not like that established guy yet. So if him and Rodgers take a minute to figure each other out, and like Allen Lazard and Randall Cobb have more touchdowns through 3 weeks than Garrett Wilson, I don't think we could be surprised by that.
Yeah, and this is like what are we actually looking for in August, I guess is a good way to frame this. I don't want my Twitter feed to be full of Allen Lazard highlights, I guess is what I'm saying, right? I don't want to hear about other Jets receivers at all during the summer. I just want a steady stream of clips of Garrett Wilson doing superhero things and Aaron Rodgers being in love with him. I want, like, normally we shouldn't be susceptible to like off-season training camp sunshine, but we need to see it with Wilson, right? Like this needs to be a combo that is clearly going to click right away. The other thing that I find somewhat difficult when actually trying to project forecast statistically what I think Wilson is going to do. It's so complicated last year because like, I don't know that he can get more targets than he had last year. He had 140 plus targets, right. They weren't the highest quality targets, but remember, like so many of those games, all those Flacco games where they were dropping back like 60, 65 times, that is not what you're going to get from the relocated Green Bay offense. No. Last year, just in terms of like time per play, seconds per play, Green Bay was next to last in the league. They are generally down there, right? The Jets were way up there, and the Jets were way up there, and the Packers were way down there. And I think we can expect that, right? Like they're going to play deliberate. Rodgers hopefully is super efficient again this year. Hopefully hasn't lost that much. But like he's going to attempt 33 or 34 passes a week. This isn't going to be an offense that like is just dropping back 55 times. So that's a thing as well. Wilson is going to have to be a whole lot better than he was in a really promising season, probably on roughly the same workload.
Yep. And, just the funny thing about kind of the push-pull between Matt LaFleur and Aaron Rodgers, which I've thought more about recently. I will recommend again the Play Callers series by Jordan Rodrigo on The Athletic. I've thought more about this since that show, that a lot of the reason that the Packers were so slow, and it wasn't necessarily that Matt LaFleur wants to play like boomer ball or something like that. They just want to. I mean, they do want to run the ball, and they have good running backs, so there is that. But also, like Rodgers, what he really wants to do, and like LaFleur kind of had to compromise on some of that, is he wants to go to the line and like point out and all that stuff.
Yeah,
audibles and move guys around, the whole thing. Whereas like, and not just run with like tempo and like get a lot of plays off, stuff like that. He wants to go and be the field general. We know Nathaniel Hackett's not going to be like, Aaron, actually, this is what we're going to do here, because we saw how that went in Denver, didn't go well. And then also just a variety of other reasons that's not going to happen there for Aaron Rodgers in New York. So I actually almost had a Jets receiver question besides Garrett Wilson, Andy, but then I decided like I don't really care. I think that Corey Davis could be better than Allen Lazard, but like I don't really care. So I ended up not going with that. My second question, though, is actually kind of a play off that. Because I'm curious, Andy, is everyone in Denver besides Jerry Jeudy actually dust? Because if you look at the, ADP, again, an early best ball draft, that's how people are viewing it. Jerry Jeudy is going off the board as a 39th overall player, the 20th wide receiver. I can't tell you how much of a hard pass that is for me, both of those. That's a hard pass. Because what I don't really buy is Cortland Sutton, 96th overall, 48th among receivers. Greg Dulcich, 11th among tight ends, but like 130th overall player. Marvin Mims, 158 overall. Tim Patrick, 168 overall. Albert O, the artist formerly known as Albert Zero, according to Dalton Del Don, 216th overall. I just don't think that. Marquez Callaway, by the way, like a guy that came over from, the Saints. So Sean Payton guy is here. He's like not even really a relevant thought. Maybe he doesn't make the team, but I don't know. At least it's interesting to me. it's just weird that we're all so sure that Jerry Jeudy is just like leaps and bounds better than these guys. When and I'm not a fan of like Sutton or Tim Patrick. Like I'm not really big on those guys. I just am so skeptical that Jeudy is this like emerging superstar. And you kind of have to assume that in addition to just everybody else being completely worthless in this offense, which I don't really think is correct either.
Yeah. In the drafts that I've had so far, and it's not like I've drafted 1,000 leagues or anything like that, but in the drafts that I've had so far, the only Broncos receiver I've taken is Mims. I don't know that it's going to happen for Mims this year, but I think he's a pretty intriguing prospect. And I think there's at least a chance that team is just kind of done with its current receiving core. Jeudy certainly had some moments last year. We are entering our third year of preseason hype around Jerry Jeudy, and we have not seen it yet. Like at some point, you have to give up the idea that he is emerging superstar Jerry Jeudy, and you just have to kind of hope for like a pretty serviceable season for him. I feel like every draft I've been involved in, someone in the league is super bullish on the player, super bullish on the Broncos offense, really bullish on a Russell Wilson revival. That all might happen. But there is, it's not that different from Garrett Wilson. It's just happening in a different round. There's always somebody willing to pay an expectant price for stuff that Jerry Jeudy just has not done in the NFL yet. And I'm not that guy. I'm closer to paying that price with Wilson than I am with Jeudy. So I haven't walked away from drafts with really, I don't have Dulcich. There's always somebody who thinks Dulcich is a little bit better than I do. That might be a reflection of my opinion of Sam Laporta, more so than my opinion of Dulcich. But like, there's just, I don't know. None of these guys are finding their way to my roster. I'll take Mims in like the 17th round. I think he's gonna find the field at least late in the season. I think he's one of those like, I'm not gonna try to spin a tale where he ends up being the Amon-Ra St. Brown of that rookie season. I don't think that's in store for us, but I think Mims is somebody who's going to begin to see the field a lot by November.
Yeah, I totally agree with you about Mims seeing the field eventually, and I tend to like Greg Dulcich, like among the players that I would actively target, and I mean maybe not actively target, but like okay, I haven't gotten a tight end, and we're deep into the 100 picks, like. Dulcich, like second year tight ends at least are interesting to me, like him and Chigo Okonkwo and stuff like that. Courtland Sutton, I just think people were way too high on him last year, way too high on him last year, and I think people are just like kind of overreacting now that like, oh, he stinks. Well, he doesn't stink. He's just like an average starting X receiver, but he's gonna get looks in this offense as long as he's out there, and I think he will be out there. Even if he was a disappointing player, he's not like a XFL talent or something like that. Tim Patrick is back, Mims is there. And it's just like, I know Jeudy, like, oh yeah, he had 972 yards last year, 6 touchdowns. Look at his yards per route run against man coverage. Like, okay, well, number one, the film doesn't back that up. That's number one. And number two, the offense stunk. So yeah. That is one of the things like this offseason that I've really narrowed in on is like these guys who have really good efficiency metrics or whatever, and the film doesn't back it up, and the offense stinks. Like, okay, great, you had 117 yards against the Rams when you lost 51-14. Absolutely terrific stuff. So I am curious, like, if we get more storylines, like, oh, Courtland Sutton is studying Michael Thomas film. Hey, he can run a slant route. There is that. Dulcich is kind of the weapon in Sean Payton's offense. And hey, Tim Patrick, Broncos beat writers, like, find yourself somebody who loves you as much as Broncos beat writers love Tim Patrick. Like, I'm interested to hear if we continue to kind of get those storylines and the fantasy community just decides to outright ignore all of it and just keep drafting Jerry Jeudy too high.
Yeah, I mean, remember it was the summer storylines and the summer like clips of Sutton and Wilson working out together and their besties, and people just started to tell themselves a Matt Stafford Cooper Kupp story.
Yeah,
without considering the differences between the specific players involved, right? Like I don't know. I feel like we just got suckered last year by off-season sunshine and off-season spin. And I don't know if I don't feel like it's an overcorrection to say, okay, that we're definitely not getting burned in the same way this off-season, but it's going to be out there again.
All right, Andy, give me your second one here.
Yeah, my second one is, this is where I get into the Ravens receiving core once again. And it is simply, who is Odell Beckham at this stage? He turns 31 in November. He's had 2 ACL surgeries. So that's a pretty bad combo, right? Like multiple ACL comeback stories are few and far between. But he's also, he's one of the most electric wide receivers of his generation. And when we last saw him on the field, he was pretty good. He was scoring a touchdown in the Super Bowl. He'd had 100 receiving yards in the NFC title game and was heavily targeted in the NFC title game. He'd had a great half season for the Rams, better than I think anything that any of us had necessarily expected. And if he can just be that guy, right? Like he doesn't have to be like rookie year Giants Odell Beckham, but if he can be that guy, and if the Ravens under Todd Monken are going to put the ball in the air like 550, 600 times, I could get super interested because Mark Andrews is the only proven commodity in that receiving core. Beckham is a guy that Lamar specifically wanted, specifically asked for, right? Like he was on the shopping list of players from Lamar Jackson. So I think just by default, because it's what Lamar probably wants, he's going to be a heavily targeted receiver as long as he's healthy. And there's clearly, whatever you think of the last version of Odell Beckham you saw, like he's going in the deep 40s at receiver, right? Like he goes super late. Nobody's fighting you for Odell Beckham if you're interested. And it hasn't been that way in a while. And again, if he can just be the guy that he was with the Rams, there's a lot of profit potential there.
I love that you said that if he's just the guy he was with the Rams, because I kind of roll my eyes when people are like, well, he's never going to be the player he was with the Giants. I mean, no, he's not going to be that player. That was A long time ago, and B, a ton of lower body injuries ago. I still say that his days with the Browns, like, let's not forget that as soon as we got him out of that situation with Baker Mayfield, he was a really good and productive player, and the film did back that up, that he was a good player with Cleveland. He was a good player with the Los Angeles. He was basically the same player in those couple seasons together. It just one time he was playing with Baker Mayfield, who just sunk DJ Moore last year. Like there's, and we can't wait to see what he does with Mike Evans. Your guy Baker Mayfield is kind of the number one culprit here in why that relationship did not work out. So I'm with you. We don't know what he is, but I'm with you. I'm interested to find out because maybe this changes when we get to like kind of when more like your leagues with your buddies and everything, but like people that know Odell Beckham are and really value that name are drafting. Maybe that changes, but for right now, like he's going after Bateman and Flowers. Like I think I'd take Bateman before Beckham, but I don't know if I'm convinced that like Zay Flowers should be going ahead of him. As much as I love Flowers as a prospect.
That is actually a really good point about, the difference between hometown drafts when you really get it. Like when you're drafting with like your college friends, your work friends, it's so different from the that we're doing right now, right? Because every draft I've been in so far is with a hardcore fantasy player who wants to draft a team a day in June, right? And so that's not who we're dealing with in early September. So it's totally possible that Beckham moves up. Beckham is somebody who can obviously move up draft boards, both like all we're going to need to see are like some highlight catches from camp, right? Against almost no coverage, which is going to happen. And he just needs to stay healthy. And then there is a really a totally realistic chance that by the end of August, but by early September, all of a sudden he's being drafted in like the early 30s at receiver because people are like, oh, I know that name. I don't know who any of these rookies are, but I know Odell Beckham, and I've seen a couple of highlights in my Twitter feed. So sure, that could definitely happen, and that would sort of ruin the party, but. I do have some shit. Like I don't even feel like I'm particularly bullish on Odell Beckham. I don't feel like I have a bullish rank on him either. I've got him in the 40s, and yet like nobody fights you for him. And so I have scooped him up in a couple drafts, and it's pretty easy to see a path to real value.
Totally. And just let me ask you this, because we did a draft debate, you and I, about who's the tight end 2 behind Travis Kelce. And I took TJ Hawkinson. You took George Kittle. Shock. You took George Kittle. Neither one of us made the case for Mark Andrews. I saw an interesting stat from Jordan Vanek, who does great work with the 33rd team over there. He pointed out that in 2022, the Baltimore Ravens had 23.5% of their total pass attempts with only one wide receiver on the field. That is a whopping 19.5% higher than the league average, and they're the only team to hit over 20% since 2018. Obviously, the receiver core was a disaster last year. They use a ton of 2 tight end stuff. I think Isaiah likely might still play a decent amount next year, but how confident are you that like Bateman or Beckham or Flowers, Flowers again, I think is the longest shot here just because he's a rookie, not because I don't love him as a player, but what's the percentage chance that like Mark Andrews is just no doubt about it the number 1 target on this team?
Oh, there's pretty good chance, right? Like it was the shortcoming of that draft debate is that we definitely should have had somebody banging the table for Mark Andrews, because it's entirely plausible that he finishes as the number 2 tight. Shoot, he's the only guy that's actually knocked off Travis Kelce from the number 1 spot at tight end over the last like 7 years, right? Like so there is certainly a case for Mark Andrews. There's a very high percentage chance that he finishes the season as the most targeted Ravens pass catcher. I just think it's going to be pretty close with Beckham, and it's been a while since there's been an actual like a real challenger to Andrews in that receiving core. Yeah,
I think it's just it's not 100% certainty, but I do think it's the most likely outcome. But I think we're drafting as if it's 100% certainty, but I'm not sure that it is, just because, the competition that Andrews has faced the last couple of years is quite different. I mean, Marquise Brown, good player, obviously, but still. Okay, my third question here, my final big one. I don't know why I'm doing this to myself, but my third question here is there any value to be had in Carolina's pass catching core? Because let me tell you what, if you... Stop laughing, Andy. If you do believe there is any value, let me tell you what, buddy, you ain't got to pay a lot for it, because those guys are all pretty much like big time free. Miles Sanders, obviously, we've discussed Miles Sanders. You and I think, are pretty high on Miles Sanders compared to the other, like Scott and Dalton, at least on Yahoo. He's the only guy who goes like in the top 100 picks. I don't know that Bryce Young's is going to come in here and support anybody. There is that, but like, Jonathan Mingo, 140 overall. Adam Thielen, 142. DJ Chark, 158. Terrace Marshall. I don't think Terrace Marshall's been a good NFL player so far, but I think he could be better than DJ Chark, and that should tell you like what I think about DJ Chark at this point. I'm just looking like, is there anything at all from this receiver core? Yeah, I don't know. And Hayden Hurst too, 197th overall. He's like the punt tight end out there right now that is probably going to moonwalk into 80 targets this year. This is an interesting question. I apologize for the knee-jerk laughter reaction to it, but like some of that is, I was the team that I'm going to ask about as my top question is a very different team from the Carolina Panthers. I'll just say that. I go in reverse order. I start off hot. All right. I'm like, let me put my best foot forward to start and then ease you into Carolina discussion.
Yeah. These guys are all totally free. And what little we've seen from beat writers covering the team suggests that like they seem to think like that Adam Thielen is going to get all the targets he can handle. I don't even know who to say is the most interesting player here. It's not Thielen to me, because I like that guy. That guy had every opportunity last year. He was running routes all the time, and the ball just did not find him. And that was with a quarterback who loves him like a pet, right? Like so. I'm skeptical that Adam Thielen is going to be one of the right answers in fantasy. DJ Chark is one of those guys who, you want to talk about an athletic profile that looks like Denzel Mims, that was it coming into the league, 4.3 speed. And was it 2019, his big season? He was tracking to finish really that year as like a top 10 wide receiver before it was like an ankle injury at the end of the season, and he played through it, but he wasn't quite as good. But he was tracking to have a phenomenal fantasy season. So there's a little bit of hope there. I can make the case for Mingo. There's not a lot of collegiate production there, but he's obviously in a wonderful situation. So it's possible that like all three primary receivers radically outperform their ADP, because you are right. Nobody is. And Bryce Young's good, but I don't know if an undersized quarterback like this is going to hold up over the long haul, but he's a good player. I can imagine him finding a bunch of success really early. I can also imagine a situation in which Carolina just wants to run the ball 35 times a week and lean on their defense, and maybe they end up averaging about 30 pass attempts per week, and ultimately none of these guys finish as top 30 receivers. But man, it's like somebody probably will. I don't know if I had to bet, I guess it would be Chark, but I don't mean that as any kind of endorsement of him.
Yeah, I think DJ Chark was really good in 2019. I also think 2019 was a long time ago, and there's been a lot of injuries for Chark since then. And they sang a lot of praises when they signed Chark too. You know, I guess this is a guy Frank Reich said he's wanted to work with forever. All right, we'll see. Again, I'm not a Terrace Marshall guy at all, but I think there's like that is like an outstanding question to me. Is Terrace Marshall going to be on the field more than DJ Chark? You know, just because Marshall at least looked comfortable running go routes and slant routes, and that's about it as an X receiver for this team last year, much more than he did as like a big slot in his rookie year. And Mingo, man, yeah, I think Mingo could be the guy that is like the rookie receiver. You know, he wasn't far off from being a first-round draft pick. You know, he was drafted very high in the second round. I was a fan of him as like a flanker, you know, off-ball power slot type. I think that's probably the role he plays for this team. And I think he could be a guy that is like a second half of the year, kind of like big time, you know, quote, league winner, probably not a league winner with a rookie quarterback, but like a big time producer in the second half of the year. So he's the guy. I'm probably not interested in drafting Jonathan Mingo in like a traditional redraft league, but he's a guy that I think is going to be like, as soon as I start to see the routes and snaps uptick, I think he could be a guy I'm interested in. But yeah, not exactly the most exciting question for me to end it on here, Andy. So why don't you give me your third and final question?
Yeah, mine was, basically the same question, but involving a different team. And that is there a right answer among the Chiefs wide receivers?
Yeah.
Slightly different offensive environment.
Potentially.
We can argue that last year there was actually not a right answer among the Chiefs wide receivers. Mahomes threw like 41 touchdown passes. Most of them, like literally a majority of them, went to Travis Kelce and Jerick McKinnon. Juju Smith-Schuster finished the year with he went over 900 yards, had only 3 touchdown receptions. Certainly didn't win you any leagues, right? Like he was fine. For fantasy purposes, he was absolutely fine. But he wasn't
better real life player
wasn't any
for
sort
the
of
Chiefs
difference
than he
maker.
was for a fantasy.
Yes,
for sure.
Absolutely. So like your candidates here, I don't know, Kadarius Toney is an absolute live wire on the field. He's had a couple of he has a couple of games on the resume that were absolutely phenomenal in New York. But he also barely played after arriving in Kansas City. I don't know if that's good or bad. It used to be that we, a midseason trade for a wide receiver, we didn't expect anything from them. But that has changed in time. His snap counts last year were consistently in the teens, right? Like barely on the field. He scored a few times, like he had some wow moments, but he just didn't play very much. Sky Moore, really buzzy rookie who did very little last year. We probably should, and you've spoken about this a few times, like we should have seen him as a developmental player, not some like plug and play starter. Like Kadarius Toney, he's now had a full off season with the team. He might be the strongest candidate that they have to take over a lot of those Juju snaps, right? Like slot snaps. He's got good speed. He's got huge hands, fun college tape. We'll see what he is in year 2. And then there's Rashee Rice, second round rookie. He's got size. He something like a 41-inch vertical, right, at the combine. So he's got the athletic traits that we like to see. Exceptional collegiate production, albeit in a non-power conference that I don't know what to do with those numbers, right? Like I'm not sure ever how impressed I should be when you really get it done at SMU as opposed to like in the SEC. I don't know, but it's better that he was super productive than not. So he's a candidate. And then the other names are like, Justin Ross, MVS, Justin Watson, Richie James. What are any of those guys going to be? That Kadarius Toney is obviously the guy that goes first. He's the guy that we've seen have, at least in brief bursts, real success in the NFL. Could be that the right answer in this receiving core outside of Kelce is just no, don't do it. Right. But it is the Chiefs. It's Patrick Mahomes. He's going to throw 40 touchdown passes and they have to go somewhere.
Yeah, right. I think that I feel like I actually have real, like rotation wise, totally. I'm curious where all these guys end up playing. Like nobody wants to hear it, but I don't think MVS is leaving the field. I don't think he's leaving the role that he had last year. And the thing is like, are we going to get Justin Watson running a bunch of routes again and like getting his cardio in? Maybe not. Rashee Rasheed Rice, I guess, was puking a bunch the first day of training camp and just said, like, yeah, that's how I'm working hard. Look, Missouri humidity. Okay, it's a different thing. Okay, I'm not gonna bang on the guy for puking a bunch on his first practice or whatever. It also sounded like it was a bit of a kerfuffle on Chiefs Twitter yesterday, but that's another discussion. I don't know that he's going to have like a clear year one role, but because I kind of think, I don't know how the Chiefs view him. They talked about him maybe as like more of a big slot type, but I think he makes sense as like MVS's long-term replacement.
Yeah.
From a vertical outside receiver standpoint. Sky Moore, I like Sky Moore a lot as a prospect. Like you mentioned, developmental guy. And what drove me crazy last year was like, well, obviously Sky Moore stinks. He can't get on the field. It's like, yeah, but he's supposed to play in Juju's role. And like Juju, I know, similar with the Cortland Sutton thing we talked about earlier, people were just way too high on him after his second year, but he doesn't suck. Like he's a solid NFL receiver, and some rookie from Western Michigan, no matter what he popped in your prospect model or whatever, is not just going to come out there and beat him out, So I think like he can moonwalk into that role this year and get decent volume. And Kadarius Toney, I mean, look, 14.5% of his routes last year were flat routes. 17.1% were screens. 11.8% was like that little whip route. He just doesn't do a lot of real receiver stuff. And ultimately, I don't think any of these guys are going to be top 30 receivers because I think it's going to look a lot what it looked like last year. So I feel like I have really good clarity on this situation, but I'm definitely curious, like who is lining up most often in 3 receiver sets, and how often are they going to have multiple tight ends on the field too? Because they love those like multiple tight end sets with like Jody Forston and these other guys.
The other thing about it is that, man, does Patrick Mahomes like pump up his receivers, right? Like we've already heard the hype about. I mean, we've heard like multiple off seasons of hype about Justin Ross. We've heard it with everybody. We've heard it with Rice. We've heard it with Moore. Like Patrick Mahomes loves his guys. I can't think of another quarterback since Carson Palmer used to do this too. Like Carson Palmer talked up everyone. Like he convinced us that so many guys who ended up being really, really sketchy NFL players were going to be breakout stars. And Mahomes is obviously doing the same thing. It's great. It's what he should do, but he's going to fool us. We're going to hear a lot of sunshine about a lot of different guys. There's going to be highlight plays from all of them. And we should place small bets on this receiving core because it's the Chiefs, because it's the best offense in football. And because again, Mahomes is going to find a way to get to like 40 touchdown passes, and they can't all go to Kelsey. Right. So there's probably going to be a semi-right answer here. I guess I'm with you that like it's entirely possible that nobody here finishes in the top 25. Pretty interested to see what Sky Moore does. Pretty interested to see if like I feel like Toney can end up having one of those years that maybe if McCole Hardman would have stayed healthy last year, he was going to have a really funky season where he would have finished with like 9 touchdowns and not very many catches, right? Like that was like he became all of a sudden like a huge piece of their red zone offense, and then some of those targets later on went to McKinnon. But they were
it's 6 total touchdowns last year, like 4 through the air and 2 on the ground. And I remember us talking about this, or McCole Hardman just is like he's kind of like their red zone. They're like their red zone back. And I mean Toney, for all of his flaws and real legit flaws as a route runner and as like a real receiver, I mean, the dude is absolutely like rare ability in the open field. So he can be McCole Hardman plus. That's just not going to equal like the Chiefs view Kadarius Toney as their number 1 receiver. That's not what that is. But it could be a very valuable piece.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine him as like and it's such a throwaway comment to say that somebody's an interesting best ball player, but he's like that kind of guy, right? Where we're never going to see the big games coming. There's probably going to be 3 or 4 of them, and not big games in terms of, oh, he got peppered with targets and he finished with 8 catches and 200 yards or something like that. But games where like Kadarius Toney gives you 55 yards and scores 2 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, right? Like I think that's probably going to happen at some point.
Yeah. Totally agree. All right, Andy, you got any honorable mentions you want to throw out before we bring in Kyle Pitts here?
I didn't have as many honorable mentions as I had in the previous episode. I think I'm just going to feel this way about Michael Thomas until he retires. His health is going to be an interesting storyline. Yeah. Like if we ever hear, like if we get to a point where like some veteran New Orleans beat writers are like, oh, this is the old Michael Thomas, I'm going to be interested. It impacts Olave. It impacts the projection for the offense as a whole. I have zero expectations right now, but like he was making a little noise before he checked out last year, right? So I'm going to be vulnerable. This is a weakness of mine, I guess, is what I'm admitting to. I am going to be personally vulnerable to some Michael Thomas hype in the offseason. And then the other thing that I flagged was the idea of the Buffalo Bills actually showing us a bunch of 12 personnel this year, because they have not done it in the past. And there's no other path for like Kincaid and Knox to both be fringy fantasy relevant players, right? Like Knox was really good at the end of the season last year. Final month of the season, he scored every week. He was back to being the previous year's Dawson Knox. We assume that Kincaid is just going to be the slot receiver. And maybe this is one of those things where like Kincaid is just a tight end in name only, and we'll call it 12 personnel, but really he's just a slot. That might be the case, but the fact is they have played very little two tight end stuff over the last several years. So it would be a change if all of a sudden they're doing that in 2023.
That's a good call out. And yeah, I'm aware of Dawson Knox touchdowns toward the end of the year because he was on all of my fantasy teams that were dead by then. So I'm aware of that one. I also had Michael Thomas among my honorable mentions. I literally wrote, God help me, I am curious about Michael Thomas. And less so that I'm interested in drafting Michael Thomas. I don't think I'm going to go down that road. But I do think his presence will be valuable for Chris Olave, because I love Olave. I'm so in on Olave, but it would be great actually, like if Michael Thomas is there and like Juwan Johnson's there and Foster Moreau is there and Rashid Shaheed steps up a little bit more. I like what I saw as his rookie season. That's like enough for the offense to be really good, to be viable, and also for defenses to not just sell out to, shade coverage to Chris Olave's way on vertical routes. So I almost am just more curious about Michael Thomas from a Chris Olave perspective. I am also curious, Elijah Moore, is he going to be in two receiver sets? That's crucial to him having a breakout season. That needs to happen, I think. Even if the Browns are going to play much more 11 personnel than they previously had, you still want Elijah out there in two receiver sets. I think he can do it. I'm excited to see if that's the case. Also, like rounding things up in the Cowboys offense, I want to hear good things about Michael Gallup. I want to hear good things about Jake Ferguson, who could be a valued tight end. And obviously, Brandon Cooks is what he is behind CeeDee Lamb at this point, too. And last thing, purely, Andy, because, hey, what is the offseason for other than just like mainlining positive reports about your guys and, just watching those videos of freak catches in the end zone over and over again. I want to see more drumbeat on Brandon Ayuk, baby. I mean, because he's having another good offseason. He had a great offseason last year, ended up having a really great season last year. I want to see it. I want to see more of it. Okay. That's what the offseason's for. I'm not going to be out in your timelines quote tweeting it like, I was told Brandon Ayuk's insert something that no one ever said about Brandon Ayuk, but I am going to watch the videos. Okay. All things admitted here.
I love the idea of you just sitting around the office, a little tear in your eye, watching Brandon Ayuk videos throughout a beautiful day in July. Are you outside? Hell no, you're not outside. You're at the laptop watching some Brandon Ayuk tape.
I can literally see my pool from here, but what I'm gonna be looking at instead is this screen. Just like playing "There Goes My Hero" in the background, just watching the training camp highlights of Brandon Ayuk. You're right. That is going to be my August. What a life! What a life I have. All right, Andy, this is awesome. Appreciate you. What do you got coming up that people can check out? What are you working on these days? I saw you wrote a great piece about Aaron Jones recently.
Have a little series coming that will have various installments in the weeks ahead. Just about guys that I think we're way too low on. I did a version of this last year, had some hits in there, had Josh Jacobs in there, right? Like I think Aaron Jones is going as like the RB17, and he hasn't finished that low in forever. Like there's almost no chance he finishes that low, right? So we're just going to be highlighting a few players like that.
All right, love to see it. Coming up next, it's Atlanta Falcons tight end Kyle Pitts on what to expect out of the Falcons this year. Let's take a listen. All right, now very excited to welcome to the show Atlanta Falcons tight end Kyle Pitts. Kyle, how's it going, man? How you doing?
Doing well. How you doing?
Hey, man, no complaints. Very excited to be talking to you. Very excited to talk about this program you got going on with Gatorade here, the Equity in Sports campaign. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I would partner with Gatorade and Lowry's to do a donation today of $25,000 to this Bellsworth Salvation Army Boys and Girls Club. It was a great time coming out here. We had a little mini camp and got a chance to meet a lot of kids and do a lot of different drills with these kids. It was young females and males, and it was a great time.
That's awesome. I mean, $25,000. That's no small chunk of change there. So I know that's going to be making a big impact. Shout out to you for doing that. And shout out to Gatorade for doing it too. I mean, that's really great to affect the next generation of young athletes. Hey, saw some good news from you today. I saw you posted on your Instagram story. Number one, I'm looking at the picture here. Love the orange interior there for the car. That's sick. I'm gonna have to get a quote for that for inside my truck. Probably not gonna be able to swing it, but it looks great. But more importantly, you said no PUP list for you going into training camp. So must be feeling good this offseason and ready for a big 2023 here, huh? Definitely.
Just been grinding. Been grinding this whole offseason in the dark, and now I'm ready for slowly getting ready right for first day of camp.
So I want to ask you a little bit about your specific role. I've got the numbers up here in front of me. As a rookie, you were kind of out wide on 28.4% of your routes. And then last year, 2022, your second season, you're out wide. Well, you're out wide 34.7% as a rookie, 28.4% this past year. You did a little more inline work this year, kind of as that, quote, traditional tight end. Where do you think you fit best as a receiver, as a tight end, whatever you kind of want to label yourself as?
I wouldn't say it's a specific spot. I would just say wherever I can win. I obviously think I can win at all positions. So to be able to win in line, in the slot, and on the outside, that's something I want to do.
But I would say most, people with the nominal label tight end next to their name on the roster are probably not lining up out wide and winning kind of as that traditional receiver. And there you can see the plays of you doing that. Like, especially as a rookie, you see a lot of that. What do you kind of bring to the table from a technique perspective or an athletic perspective that is different some of these other tight ends out there?
Well, I think in general, the tight end position has changed, and it's changed over the years from back when they were just an extra tackle, I guess you'd say, or athletic tackle. But now, have to be a hybrid and be able to do everything. So the techniques to just be able to block in line and also be able to get downfield and stretch the field.
Yeah, which you definitely do a good job of that. I think perhaps you could tell me if I'm wrong on this. Maybe some of the lower out wide percentage last year had to do with the fact that, as a rookie, you had some good receivers on your team. But then this second year, you guys get Drake London in the top 10 there. And Drake, I mean, that guy is an incredible big-time receiver on the outside, plays a lot of that true X-receiver role. How do you guys kind of fit in and complement each other?
I wouldn't say I have a specific answer for you on that. I just think, whatever Coach Smith draws up, we go out and execute it, and the ball goes his way, it goes his way. If it comes my way, we both make plays. So, just working hand in hand and working together and trying to, create a common goal of winning.
Yeah, no doubt. And speaking of Arthur Smith, I kind of wanted to ask you about him because I'll be honest with you, like in the fantasy football community, he takes a lot of crap for running the ball too much or this, that, and the other. But he's one of my favorite offensive play callers, like to watch on film. I think his offense is great. I love the way he calls plays. I love the way he sequences plays. I love, kind of where he attacks on the field. What about playing in his offense do you really enjoy most, and kind of what is he like as a head coach?
He's a great person off the field and on the field, And then his offense is just dynamic. Everyone moves around, it's positionless. So everybody plays everything. So, to be able to have the opportunity to do that is awesome, to be able to play inside, outside, in line, like I said earlier, and everybody's just kind of interchangeable. It makes it pretty fun.
Is there like one concept or play that he's kind of dialed in for you that you really like the first time you saw it's kind of, oh man, this is something really exciting that I can't wait to run on the field?
Yes, there's definitely a couple, but I probably can't give you any specifics.
Well, you don't have to be too specific, but just like generalities, maybe anything at all.
That's a couple.
So it's a couple. So what you're saying is there's a lot to look forward to, right? That people can get excited to actually watch it on Sunday. So And I think one of the things that's interesting about you guys this year, obviously, is you're breaking in a new quarterback, Desmond Ridder. He started 4 games last year. You were injured during those games. You didn't necessarily play with him, but what is he like as a guy? What is he going to bring? What should Falcons fans be excited about with Desmond Ridder this year?
Desmond's a leader. He's somebody who grabbed the locker room and he kind of just told everybody what the common goal is, and everybody to get on the train. So everybody's buying into what he's preaching as the quarterback, and we're all working towards the same thing.
Working towards the same goal to win the NFC South. Obviously, it's kind of a lighter division, right? I mean, if you could look at it that way from a record perspective, last year, the Bucs make the playoffs. They didn't necessarily have the season they wanted. Where do you guys see yourself right now as a very young team kind of pushing towards that goal? You have some good veterans too. Calais Campbell, great guy on the defensive side of the football, but as kind of a younger team, do you guys see yourself as maybe on the come up and could potentially take this division over the next few years?
I wouldn't necessarily put a timeline on it, but I say with the team we have, we just have the hunger to go out and, with the new quarterback, it's a new team, and to be able to just go out and win every game as much as we can and try and win a division, and then, go on to maybe however far it takes us.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys have a good setup there. I mentioned fantasy football earlier, right? I'm sure you've heard a lot from fantasy football players over the first 2 years of your career. There's kind of like a small movement in the fantasy world that I'm going to tell you, Kyle, I am not a part of. I don't endorse this idea. So I'll say that I'll admit my bias off the top. But some people have said, oh, the tight end position, it's too hard to predict. These guys, there's Travis Kelce and then there's everybody else. It's too hard. We should take out the tight end position in fantasy football. What do you think about that, if you have any thoughts at all?
I don't really have any thoughts towards fantasy. That's just guys sitting around who draft people. So it is what it is. I don't really, that's not what we do in real life. So when we come out in the game and perform, that's all that matters, about the win, not about, individual stats.
Yeah, and I think that's one great thing about you guys. It seems like you have a pretty unselfish crew there. Last guy I'll kind of ask you about here, Bijan Robinson. Have you gotten to really get a look at him at all from a minicamp perspective, seeing him on the field? And it seems like he's another guy that might line up at multiple spots.
Definitely. Bijan's a great person. He brings a lot to the team, and I'm excited to see what we do in this upcoming camp.
Well, hey, Kyle, really appreciate your time today. Good luck this season, man. Stay healthy and go crush it out there. I think you guys have a ton of potential on offense, and I personally can't wait to watch it.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, that's going to do it for the show. Shout out to Andy Behrens and Kyle Pitts for hopping on today. Next week, we have a fun one on Tuesday as Kate Majuk, who's going to be doing some work with Yahoo this year. So shout out to her. It's time to get her in front of the podcast audience. She's going to join the show to help me determine what minicamp hype pieces will hold a candle in training camp. Also, we've got another very special guest. We're on a great run of players on this podcast. We got a very special guest from a true AFC contender. We may have referenced him on this very show today. He's going to be joining us Tuesday as well. You're not going to want to miss that. Until then, we're out.